The wind didn't just carry dust through the cracked windows of the Morales ranch. It carried the smell of death. The death of cattle, the death of crops, and now the death of a family. Anna stood over the old wooden table, her fingers tracing the ink on a debt notice. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a gravestone for everything her father had built. In the next room, her mother coughed, a dry, weak sound that chipped away at Anna's soul. The cattle were already gone. The land was next. So when the glossy black carriage appeared on the horizon, a smudge of ink against the sun-scorched earth, she didn't bother to look. She didn't have to. She knew who sent it. She knew the name that had been a curse on their lips for months. Henry Whitlock, a railroad baron with a heart of steel and a wallet big enough to buy the entire New Mexico territory. He was old enough to be her grandfather and cruel enough to prove it. The offer came from his lawyer, cold and simple. Marriage in exchange for her family's debt. He would save the Morales name, but only if she gave him hers. Her mother had wept. She had prayed to saints who didn't answer. And then, in a whisper that sounded like surrender, she had said, "Misha, I'll die if you don't." So Anna put on her only good skirt, packed a rosary and the deed to land that was no longer hers, and climbed into that black carriage. She didn't let herself cry. The sun was watching. The road to Santa Fe was long. It followed the new railroad, a scar of iron hewn through the desert. Whitlock's scar. The same steel that had stolen their water and their future. Santa Fe smelled different. Not of sage and earth, but of coal smoke and perfume. The carriage stopped before a mansion with columns as white as bone. And there he was, Henry Whitlock, standing in the doorway. He was tall and thin, his black suit hanging on him like a shroud. His eyes were the color of a winter sky. He looked her up and down, not like a suitor, but like a man inspecting livestock. "You'll do," he said, and the words echoed in the sudden silence. Anna's heart stopped, but her chin stayed up. "Then let's be done with it," she replied, her voice so steady it even surprised him. The wedding was set for the next day, a quick, quiet affair in the parlor. That night, Anna watched her mother's carriage retreat back into the darkness, a tiny speck of hope disappearing. She pressed her hand to the cold glass. "Mama," she whispered, "I'll buy our freedom with my name." Downstairs, she could hear the servants laughing as they prepared for the celebration. It sounded like mockery. She knew she had walked into a cage, but she swore to herself in that silent, gilded room that she would not die in it. Not quietly, not as his property. The morning sun lit up the adobe walls of Santa Fe, but inside the Whitlock mansion, everything was shadows and whispers. Anna stood at the makeshift altar in a borrowed dress, her hands clenched tight. The room was full of strangers with cold eyes and colder smiles. The preacher's voice trembled. Henry Whitlock stood beside her, his breathing shallow, a dry rustle of paper. His hand shook as he placed the ring on her finger. Not from love, not from nerves. It was the tremor of a man whose life had already run out. "Do you take this man?" the preacher asked. She nodded. It wasn't a promise. It was a payment. The applause was like a handful of stones thrown against a tin roof. Sharp. Empty. From the crowd, a woman in pearls, Eleanor Whitlock, the Baron's widowed daughter-in-law, leaned over to a friend. "She'll be gone before spring," she hissed, just loud enough to be heard, "like all his other toys." Anna heard it, and so did the man standing at the back of the room, still in his traveling coat. Samuel, Henry's son, just arrived from Boston. His eyes met Anna's for a split second. There was no pity in them, just a calm, assessing gaze. Then he looked away. The reception was a nightmare of fake smiles and hollow toasts. Henry bragged about his railroad, his hand gripping Anna's waist so tightly she could feel her ribs creak. She forced a smile for the photographer, a grimace that hurt more than his grip. By nightfall, the guests were gone. The servants cleared away the wilted flowers and half-empty glasses. "Meet me upstairs," Henry ordered, his voice thin and reedy. Anna walked up the grand staircase, each step a nail in her coffin. The bedroom was lit by flickering candles, making the portraits of dead Whitlocks on the walls seem to watch her every move. The old man poured himself a brandy, the dark liquid sloshing in the glass. "You're quieter than I expected," he sneered. Anna didn't answer. Her heart was a drum beating against her ribs. She finally turned to face him, to accept her fate. He raised the glass to his lips, a cruel grin spreading across his face. And then everything changed. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes went wide with a surprise that wasn't joy. The grin froze, then shattered. The brandy glass slipped from his fingers, spilling a dark stain down the front of his shirt as his body convulsed. It didn't just fall. It exploded on the floor, sending shards of glass spinning across the carpet. Anna stared, frozen in place. "Mr. Whitlock," she whispered, but he was already toppling over, a dead weight falling sideways. She lunged, but it was too late. His head hit the arm of a velvet chair with a sickening thud. His eyes were wide open, but they were seeing nothing. The sound of the crash brought servants running, and in the doorway Samuel appeared, his face a mask of shock. He knelt by his father, felt for a pulse, for a breath. Then he looked up, his gaze locking onto Anna's. She was trembling, not with fear of what had happened, but with the terrible, certain knowledge of what would happen next. The bargain was over. Her freedom had arrived, and no one in this world would ever believe she hadn't planned it this way. By sunrise, the mansion was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. Servants huddled in corners, their whispers slithering through the hallways. Reporters were already camped out by the main gate, like vultures smelling a fresh kill. Anna sat alone at the massive dining table, the borrowed wedding dress replaced with a simple black shawl. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. The doctor had come and gone. The official cause of death was a stroke. Sudden but not entirely unexpected for a man of Henry's age and temper. But gossip doesn't need proof. It only needs a good story. And Anna was the perfect villain. Eleanor, the daughter-in-law, paced in front of the fireplace, her pearls clicking like an abacus, counting up Anna's sins. "A girl half his age," she said, her voice carrying through the cavernous room. "No family, no fortune, and he dies on their wedding night. I call it convenient." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the staff. Anna said nothing. She knew silence was a shield. The truth was a weapon she didn't have the strength to wield. Not yet. The sheriff arrived before noon. He was polite, his questions gentle, but his eyes were hard. He asked her about the brandy, about their conversation, about the moment Henry collapsed. "You didn't leave his side?" he asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "No," Anna replied, her voice a thread. "He told me to wait for him upstairs." The sheriff nodded, wrote something down, and left without another word. Through it all, Samuel watched from the doorway of his father's study. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken a single word to her since that moment in the bedroom. He just watched, as if he were trying to dissect her, to find the guilt he was so sure was hiding inside. The undertakers arrived as the sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the lawn. The house fell silent, the only sound the heavy scraping of the coffin being dragged down the hall. When it was finally over, Eleanor approached Anna, a folded newspaper in her hand. "You've made the front page," she said, her voice dripping with venom. She tossed it onto the table. The headline was stark. "Railroad Baron dies on wedding night. Young bride's past in question." And beneath it a photograph of Anna, her eyes wide, her mouth half open in a silent scream. "You'll be gone by morning," Eleanor sneered. "Father's will is clear. Only legitimate heirs inherit. That means us, not you." Anna looked up, her gaze steady. "If the will is so clear," she asked, her voice quiet but ringing with steel, "then why are you so afraid of me?" Eleanor's face flushed with anger. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. But Samuel remained. He stepped out of the shadows of the study. "You didn't love him," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Anna admitted, "but I didn't kill him either." Their eyes met, and for the first time he didn't look away. There was a long pause, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting the seconds. "Then stay," he said finally, "at least until the lawyers sort this out." Anna almost laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think your family will allow that?" Samuel glanced towards the parlor where Eleanor was already barking orders at the staff. "They won't," he said, his voice low. "But I will." Just then, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the desert, and the gas lamps in the hall flickered, casting his face in a shifting, uncertain light. And in that moment, Anna felt something she hadn't felt since she'd arrived. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. A dangerous, flickering curiosity about this strange, quiet man who would stand against his own family for a woman the world had already decided was a killer. The reading of the will was a bigger spectacle than the funeral. The mansion was suffocating, filled with the smell of expensive perfume and quiet greed. Every distant cousin, every banker, every reporter in Santa Fe was there, packed into the grand parlor. They weren't there to mourn. They were there to watch a dynasty carve up its dead. Anna sat by the window, away from the crowd. She could feel their eyes on her, a physical weight on her shoulders. Samuel stood a few feet away, a silent, unreadable sentinel. The family lawyer, a man with a face like old parchment, cleared his throat and began to read. Dry, legal words filled the air. Properties, bonds, rail shares, a river of wealth flowing to the waiting Whitlocks. Then he said her name. "To Mrs. Anna Whitlock, widow of the deceased." The room held its breath. "The sum of $3,000 and full unencumbered rights to the Morales homestead as repayment of marital commitment." The parlor exploded. Eleanor shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury. "Repayment?" she shrieked. "She's been paid enough by the scandal. This is an insult to our father's memory." A wave of cruel laughter rippled through the guests. Someone muttered, "Poison in a kiss." Another whispered, "She planned the whole thing." Anna didn't move. She just stared out the window, at the vast empty desert beyond the manicured lawns. When the lawyer finally dismissed the gathering, Eleanor swept towards her. "You can keep your blood money," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous, "but you won't keep your dignity. This town will eat you alive." Anna stood up slowly, meeting the older woman's gaze. "Then it'll choke on me first," she said. The entire room went silent. No one had expected the little ranch girl to have a voice made of iron. Samuel stepped forward, placing his hat on the table. "That's enough, Eleanor. Father's choices were his own. She owes this family nothing." The crowd shifted. A Whitlock defending the Black Widow. Eleanor's smile was thin and sharp as a razor. "And what do you owe her, Samuel?" "Pity." He didn't answer, and his silence was louder than any confession. The lawyer quickly packed his briefcase, his eyes darting between them. He could already see the headlines for tomorrow's paper. After the guests had gone, the house felt hollow. Anna walked out onto the porch, the desert wind pulling at her hair. Samuel followed her out. "You should leave," he said, his voice softer now. "Go home, before they destroy you completely." She turned to him, the last light of day catching in her eyes. "I can't. That land isn't truly mine until the law says it is. And besides," she hesitated, "you're not just fighting for the land anymore, are you?" No, she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm fighting for my name. He nodded slowly as if he was finally beginning to understand. But from inside the house, behind the lace curtains of the parlor window, Eleanor watched them, and the look on her face wasn't just anger, it was calculation. The fight, Anna realized with a sickening lurch, had only just begun. But the next morning, something was different. The sheriff returned, but not for Anna. He walked straight past her, his face grim, and asked to speak with Samuel. They closed themselves in the study for nearly an hour. When they emerged, the sheriff wouldn't meet Anna's eyes. Samuel, however, looked directly at her. His expression was a mixture of confusion and something else, something that looked almost like suspicion. They re-examined the brandy glass, he said, his voice flat. The doctor found a residue, a substance he couldn't identify. A cold dread washed over Anna. What kind of substance? He shook his head. He's not sure, but it was on the rim of the glass, exactly where my father's lips would have been. The implication hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Eleanor was already telling the servants that Anna must have used some kind of local herb, some desert poison known only to her people. The family lawyer seized on the news. He filed a motion to contest the will, claiming Anna had used undue influence, or worse, to secure her inheritance. The $3,000 and the deed to her family's ranch were frozen, pending a new investigation. She was trapped, a prisoner in the house of the man she was now unofficially accused of murdering. Samuel grew more distant. He spent his days locked in his father's study, poring over stacks of ledgers and contracts. Anna would see him through the open door, a pencil behind his ear, his face etched with concentration. She didn't know if he was looking for a way to save her or a way to condemn her. One afternoon, she couldn't take the silence anymore. She walked into the study. The room smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. "Are you looking for something?" she asked. He looked up, startled. "Answers," he said simply. "My father was a complicated man. His death should be simple. It isn't." His eyes drifted to a stack of contracts on the desk. Land acquisitions, loan agreements, the paper trail of a predator. Anna's gaze fell on a signature at the bottom of one page. Morales, her father's handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. Samuel saw her expression and picked up the ledger. He flipped through the pages, his own face hardening with every turn. "He signed away his water rights 5 years ago," Samuel murmured, "at an interest rate no man could ever repay." He kept flipping. Then he took out loans, through a shell company, Whitlock Holdings and Water. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a terrible understanding. "It was all my father. He created the debt. He drove your family to the brink. He trapped you from the very beginning." The marriage wasn't a bargain. It was the final move in a long, cruel game. It was a foreclosure. He wasn't just buying the land. He meant to buy her, too. A train whistle shrieked in the distance, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the desolation in her heart. Her hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This destroys his name." Samuel looked at her, and for the first time there was no suspicion in his eyes, only a shared burning shame. "Because the truth doesn't care about names," he said. "And I'm done living on a foundation of his lies." He began to gather the ledgers, tying them together with a piece of twine. "I'm taking these to the courthouse tomorrow morning. The whole town is going to see what kind of man they buried." Just as he finished speaking, the study doors burst open. Eleanor stood there, flanked by 2 of the sheriff's deputies. Her smile was triumphant. "I don't think so, Samuel," she said. "Those ledgers are property of the Whitlock estate, and you," she said, her eyes locking onto Anna, "are under arrest for the murder of my father-in-law." The deputies moved forward, their hands reaching for Anna. But Samuel stepped between them, holding the stack of ledgers like a shield. "You won't touch her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you won't touch these books." Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Samuel, always so noble, always so foolish. Did you really think you could defy this family? Did you really think you could save her?" She gestured to the deputies. "Take them. Both of them." The men hesitated, glancing at each other. Samuel was still a Whitlock, after all. That single moment of hesitation was all they needed. Samuel shoved the heavy ledgers into Anna's arms. "Run," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Go out the back. Get these to Judge Miller. Don't stop for anything." Before Anna could protest, he turned and slammed the heavy oak door in Eleanor's face, throwing the bolt. Anna could hear shouting, the thud of fists against the wood. She didn't wait. Clutching the ledgers to her chest, she fled. She ran through the cavernous kitchen, past the stunned faces of the servants, and out the back door into the blinding afternoon sun. She didn't know the city. She didn't know where the courthouse was. But she ran. She could hear the sound of a whistle behind her, the shouting of the deputies. They were coming for her. The streets of Santa Fe were a maze of adobe walls and dusty alleys. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw them, two figures in the distance, getting closer. Panic seized her. She ducked into a narrow passageway between a bakery and a blacksmith's shop, the smell of hot bread and coal smoke filling her lungs. She pressed herself against the cool adobe wall, her heart hammering against her ribs, the heavy ledgers digging into her arms. The footsteps grew louder, then past the mouth of the alley. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't look. They didn't. When the sound of their boots had faded, she peered out. The street was empty. She had a choice. She could keep running, try to disappear into the vastness of the territory. Or she could do what Samuel told her to do. She could fight. She thought of her mother. She thought of the deed to her family's land, tucked away in her room. She thought of Samuel, back in that study, buying her time. She took a deep breath, stepped out of the alley, and started asking for directions to the courthouse. When she finally found it, a stern, imposing building in the center of the plaza, her dress was torn and she was covered in dust. The clerk at the front desk looked her up and down with disdain. "Judge Miller is in session. You can't just—" "It's about Henry Whitlock," Anna said, her voice breathless but firm. She placed the ledgers on the counter. The clerk's eyes widened. The name Whitlock opened doors, even doors to a judge's chambers. She was led down a quiet hall and into a small, dark office lined with books. Judge Miller was an old man with tired eyes, but they sharpened as Anna stumbled through her story, laying out the ledgers, pointing to her father's signature, to the shell companies, to the impossible interest rates. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, he sat back in his chair, stroking his white beard. "This is a serious accusation, young lady, to bring something like this against a man like Henry Whitlock." He trailed off, looking at the books. "It's the truth," Anna whispered. The judge was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said, "but belief isn't enough. We need proof that goes beyond these pages. And we need your witness. Where is Samuel Whitlock?" Before Anna could answer, the door to the judge's chambers flew open. The sheriff stood there, and behind him, a bruised and disheveled Samuel, held between two deputies. Eleanor swept into the room behind them, her face a storm cloud of fury. "There he is, Judge," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at Samuel, "the traitor who conspired with this murderer to steal from his own family and slander his father's good name." The judge rose to his feet, his calm demeanor gone, replaced by a cold authority. "Sheriff, unhand that man this instant. Mrs. Whitlock, you will hold your tongue in my chambers, or I will have you removed." He turned his gaze on Samuel. "Son, you have a lot of explaining to do." Samuel straightened his torn collar, his eyes finding Anna's across the room. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The battle had just moved to a new front, and this time they would fight it together. The hearing was a circus. The courthouse was packed to the rafters with everyone who mattered in Santa Fe and everyone who didn't. Eleanor sat at the front, dressed in dramatic widow's black, flanked by the best lawyer money could buy. She was painting a picture of a grieving family besieged by a conniving seductress and a traitorous son. Anna and Samuel sat alone at the defendant's table. They had no lawyer. They only had the truth. And the truth, Anna was quickly learning, was a hard thing to sell. Eleanor's lawyer was brilliant. He twisted every fact, every detail. The ledgers, the work of a disgruntled son, forging documents to steal his inheritance. Samuel's defense of Anna, proof that she had bewitched him, turned him against his own blood. When Samuel took the stand, the lawyer tore into him. "Isn't it true, Mr. Whitlock, that you hold a significant number of shares in the rival Texas Western Rail Company? Isn't it true that your father's death and the subsequent scandal has caused Whitlock rail stock to plummet while Texas Western's has soared?" The room gasped. Samuel paled. It was true. He had invested in the rival company years ago, a silent protest against his father's brutal business practices. But now, in this courtroom, it looked like the perfect motive. He was trying to destroy his father's empire to build his own. "He's shaming his father's name to protect his lover," Eleanor cried out from her seat, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. The crowd was turning against them. Anna could feel their hostility, a suffocating wave of judgment. Then it was her turn. She walked to the stand, her legs trembling. The lawyer circled her like a shark. He asked her about her family's poverty, about her mother's illness. He made her sound like a desperate girl who would do anything for money. "Did you love Henry Whitlock?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "No," Anna said quietly. "Did you desire his fortune?" "I desired my family's freedom." "A freedom you secured with his death," the lawyer thundered. "Objection!" Samuel called out, but the judge was already looking at Anna, waiting for her answer. She took a deep breath. "I was poor when I met Henry Whitlock," she said, her voice clear and steady now, ringing through the silent courtroom. "He bought me like he bought everything else, land, cattle, people, but he couldn't buy my silence." She looked directly at the jury, at the faces of the ordinary people of the town. "He didn't die because of me. He died because of a lifetime of greed. You all know it. You've seen what his railroad has done to this territory. He bled ranchers dry. He took their water, their land, their hope. My family was just one of many. Look in those ledgers. You'll find your own names there, your friends' names, your parents' names." A murmur rippled through the gallery. People were shifting in their seats, looking at each other. The lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge waved him into silence. Anna wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to Eleanor. "You talk about your father's legacy. His legacy is in those books, a legacy of ruin. Is that what you're so desperate to protect?" Eleanor's face was white with rage, but before she could speak, Samuel stood up. "Judge, I have one more piece of evidence, and one final witness." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. "I call Dr. Alistair Finch to the stand." The Whitlock family doctor, a small, nervous man, made his way to the witness box. He was sweating, his hands trembling as he took the oath. Samuel approached him gently. "Doctor, you were the first to examine my father's body, and you were the one who found the unidentified substance on the brandy glass, correct?" "Yes," the doctor squeaked. And you later testified that this substance was a rare desert poison, a poison that pointed the finger directly at Mrs. Whitlock. That is correct. Samuel leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Doctor, under oath, I want you to tell this court who told you to say that. The doctor began to tremble violently. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide with fear. Her face was a mask of cold fury, a silent, deadly warning. He licked his dry lips. No one told me. It was my own medical opinion. Samuel sighed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Then perhaps you can explain this. He unfolded the paper and held it up for the jury to see. It was a promissory note for a very large sum of money. A gambling debt. It was signed by Dr. Finch, and the lender was Eleanor Whitlock. The doctor looked like he was going to faint. She was blackmailing you, wasn't she, doctor? She held this debt over your head. She told you to fake the report, to invent a poison to frame Anna Morales. Didn't she? The doctor stared at the note, then at Eleanor's murderous glare. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The entire courtroom leaned forward, holding its breath. And then, in a choked, broken whisper, he said, "Yes. God help me, yes. It was all a lie." The room erupted into chaos. Eleanor lunged to her feet, screaming. But it was too late. The truth was out. The foundation of her lies had crumbled to dust, burying her beneath it. Justice, when it finally comes, is a tidal wave. Eleanor was arrested on the spot, charged with perjury, blackmail, and conspiracy. The doctor, in exchange for his testimony, received a lesser charge. The original ruling on the will was upheld. The Morales homestead belonged to Anna, free and clear. But it didn't stop there. The judge, moved by the revelations in the ledgers, launched a full-scale investigation into the Whitlock estate. One by one, the other families Henry had ruined came forward, their stories echoing Anna's. The Whitlock empire, that monument to greed built on a foundation of lies, began to tremble. Anna and Samuel walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding sunlight. The crowd on the plaza parted for them, their whispers no longer of scorn, but of awe. Down the street, a newsboy was already shouting the headlines: "Whitlock heiress arrested. Rancher's widow vindicated." Samuel looked down at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You just buried a dynasty," he said. Anna shook her head. "No, I just stopped kneeling to one." They left Santa Fe that afternoon. The family that remained, the brothers, the cousins, had already turned on Samuel, officially disowning him. He was no longer a Whitlock. "Then I'm free," was all he said. They didn't take the fancy carriage. They bought a simple wagon and 2 sturdy horses. As they prepared to leave, a messenger from the lawyer's office found them. He handed Samuel a sealed envelope. Samuel opened it. His face went pale. "What is it?" Anna asked. He looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's another will," he said. "A final one. My father wrote it a month before he died. He must have hidden it." He read from the document, his voice trembling slightly. His father, it seemed, had known about Eleanor's treachery. He had known about his other children's greed. In this new will, he disinherited all of them, every single one. He left his entire fortune, the railroad, the mines, the houses, everything, to the one person he believed had the strength and integrity to run his empire. He left it all to Samuel. But there was a condition, a single chilling line at the end. He must run the company with an iron fist, just as I did. He must be my son in truth, not just in name. The wagon rattled along the dusty road, leaving the noise and the intrigue of Santa Fe behind. Samuel held the reins, but his mind was miles away, wrestling with the ghost of his father. He had been given a kingdom, but the price of the crown was to become the very man he despised. They arrived back at the Morales Ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house was small, the fences were broken, the fields were overgrown. It was a ruin, and it was the most beautiful thing Anna had ever seen. For days, Samuel was silent. He helped her mend the fences and clear the fields, his hands, once soft from a life of books and numbers, growing calloused and rough. He worked from sunup to sundown, as if trying to exhaust the devil on his shoulder. One evening they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the vast, dark sky. The air was cool and smelled of sage. "They think all I ever wanted was the land," Anna said softly. Samuel looked at her, his face serious in the dim light. "What do you want, Anna?" She thought for a moment. "To live one day," she said, "without owing anyone anything." He nodded slowly. The next morning he hitched the horses to the wagon. "I have to go back to Santa Fe," he said. "There's something I have to do." Anna's heart sank. She thought he had made his choice. She thought he was going to claim his inheritance, to become the new Henry Whitlock. She simply nodded. "I'll be here when you get back," she said, her voice betraying none of the fear she felt. He was gone for a week. A week of silence, of waiting, of wondering. Anna worked the land, her hands bleeding, her back aching. She found a rhythm in the work, a peace in the exhaustion. She was rebuilding her home. She could do it alone if she had to. Then, one afternoon, she saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. It was his wagon. He pulled up to the house and climbed down, his face tired but his eyes clear. He didn't say a word. He just handed her a stack of papers. She read the top one. It was a legal document, transferring the ownership of Whitlock Rail to a new entity, the New Mexico Ranchers Cooperative. He hadn't claimed the empire. He had given it away. He had spent the entire week in Santa Fe with a team of lawyers, dismantling his father's legacy piece by piece. He liquidated every asset. He used the fortune to create a massive restitution fund, paying back every family in the ledgers with interest. He established trusts to build schools and hospitals in the communities the railroad had destroyed. He had taken his father's tainted money and washed it clean, turning a weapon of oppression into a tool of renewal. He had saved nothing for himself. He had come back to her with nothing but the clothes on his back and the wagon he stood beside. Anna looked up from the papers, her eyes filled with tears. "You lost everything," she whispered. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "No," he said, taking her calloused hand in his. "I already had. Now I get to choose what's worth keeping." The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the small, broken-down ranch. A train whistle blew in the far distance, a lonely, fading sound. But this time it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a farewell. They stood there for a long time, two people who had been bought and sold, who had lost everything and fought their way back. They weren't a baron's son and a rancher's daughter anymore. They were just Anna and Samuel, and they were finally, truly free. She was sold to save her family's land, but in the end, she bought back her own life. If freedom came at this price, would you have paid it too? Tell me in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of the forgotten past.